If you are reckless about one of the most important things in your business and you get scammed by crooks, whose fault is it? My name is Andrei Mincov. I'm the founder of Trademark Factory, and in this video I'm going to share my thoughts about yet another intellectual property screw up. This time around, it's Nginx being raided in Russia. All right, let me read from the article and I'll be giving comments as I go through it. All right, Russia raids office of US web server giant in copyright clash. Russian police raided the offices of Nginx Inc., a US company behind one of the largest web server projects, and briefly detained its founder in a case that could stoke renewed fears of law enforcement being used to settle corporate disputes. Russia's Rambler Group, the parent company of one of the country's biggest search engines and internet portals, controlled by the government, said in a statement Thursday it uncovered copyright violations to its exclusive rights to Nginx, which was acquired by Seattle-based F5 Networks Inc. this year in a deal that valued the company at $670 million. So right after the acquisition of the company by a US entity, suddenly a state-controlled entity discovered that they actually had some copyright claims to that software. Let's keep reading. The dispute centers around the development of Nginx's original open source web server code by Igor Sysoev when he worked at Rambler nearly 2 decades ago. So Rambler sees itself as the rightful owner of the code. Nginx was first released publicly in 2004. It now controls more than 30% of the server market for web-facing computers behind only the Apache Foundation, according to Netcraft, which monitors the industry. So what Rambler is saying is that, we just realized one thing. The code was written in 2004 by our former employee, and we think we own this code. Interesting. And so if you're wondering if they can actually go back this far, the answer is that with statute of limitations, the standard is always that the time that the clock starts ticking from the moment you knew about the infringement or you should have known about it. And what Rambler is saying is that we didn't know. We just discovered. We just figured it out. Like, yes, I'm sorry it took us this long, but now we figured it out. Yes, it's open code. We just never bothered to look at it. But now because you know what? This acquisition made us look at things differently. It opened our eyes. We realized that yes, it looks like this is a blatant case of copyright infringement. How could he have done this to us? He was misleading us for 16 years and only now did we figure it out. That's obviously their position, what it's going to be. And of course, the common sense position is all of this is bullshit. But don't forget, it's going to be heard in a Russian court by a Russian judge, and the Russian court and a Russian judge will find the right way to determine when was the time when Rambler knew or should have known about the infringement, if there was an infringement. So let's keep going. The raid is the latest example of the widespread use of Russian law enforcement in corporate disputes. US investor Michael Calvi, one of the most successful private equity investors in Russia, was jailed this year and remains under house arrest over what he claims is a business conflict. Maxim Konovalov, who co-founded Nginx Inc. in 2011, linked the raid to the May sale of the company. Really? Imagine that. He and his partner Sisoyev were briefly detained during the Thursday raids of their apartments and the company's Moscow office. "We fear for our freedom," Konovalov said by phone. "Rambler didn't pay attention to us in the preceding years." Konovalov says he and Sisoyev are not going to flee Russia. "We will stay and we will fight." Okay, there's a bunch of things here. Just because Rambler didn't pay attention to them doesn't mean anything, right? Yeah, Russia does not recognize the doctrine where if you allow somebody to openly infringe on your rights, then you are deemed to have waived the right to sue them after. That's not how it works in Russia, right? So in Canada, in the US, with common law countries, there is this doctrine that, which is really why you often hear that we are required by law to sue you, because if we don't, we will lose our rights in our trademark and our intellectual property. It's not exactly the way it works, but it's kind of a simplified version of it, because the idea is that if you allow somebody to use your intellectual property without your authorization openly, and you do nothing about it, you are deemed to have given them a license to do it, because it's called an implied license, right? And if you then change your mind and go after them and sue them, that would be unfair, because you led them into believing that if they openly do this and you have not expressed your discontent with that, it's unfair for you to change your mind after they've established their share in the market using that product or that service under that brand. So that's the first thing. Just because they didn't pay attention by itself doesn't mean anything, especially in Russia. Second thing is it sometimes just baffles me how very, very smart people make really, really dumb decisions. Because I mean, look, for anybody to build something as amazing as Nginx, something as popular, to build it up to a company that's now valued in hundreds of millions of dollars, you gotta have brains, you gotta be smart, you gotta be really good at what you do. But if you're that smart, why the hell would you say, we're not gonna flee Russia, we will stay and we will fight? You can't fight Russia, because it's not about you having a fair chance. Really your obligation, your duty to you, to your family, to your business, is to continue for the business to operate, is for you to continue to thrive running that business and giving the value, continuing to give value to the world that your product provides. You going behind the bars and spending 10 years in jail doesn't really accomplish anything. Russia has given multiple examples of all old oil magnates getting thrown in jail if they didn't want to leave Russia, other business people. And yes, they didn't want to flee. Yes, they didn't want to leave Russia. They loved their country, but none of that ended well for them. None of it. So I left Russia, and it's not that I was ever persecuted, but I saw what the country was becoming, and that's one of the biggest reasons why I left in 2007. And the interesting thing here is that really, if they believe that them staying and fighting against the system is going to accomplish any good, they're absolutely naive. They're out of their minds. And I'm afraid that this could cause a lot of harm to the company, to the shareholders, to the market in general, because it creates uncertainty. Creates uncertainty about what's going to happen to the code, what's going to happen to the business model, what's going to happen to all of that software. But let's keep going. Igor Ashmanov, who was an executive at Rambler when Sysoev worked there, said Sysoev had started developing the technology underlying Nginx before he joined the company. Sysoev left Rambler in 2011 to co-found Nginx. The company is based in San Francisco but has offices around the world. Yandex NV, Russia's biggest tech company, also state-controlled, called the raid a very bad signal. Several IT industry associations condemned the action, according to an open letter published on the Говорит Москва radio station. Rambler, owned by billionaire Alexander Mamut and Sberbank PJSC, said it ceded its rights to Nginx to a Cyprus-owned holding company, Linwood Investments CY Ltd. Linwood is controlled by Mamut's son, Nikolai, according to Interfax news agency. Linwood said by email it informed law enforcement about the situation and the authorities opened up a criminal case. The company declined to comment on its ownership. So they are trying, the government or the government-controlled entities, they're trying to make it look like a nothing to see here, just business, right? That's why it's not even a Russian company that's suing, it's the Cyprus company that's suing. So no, of course government has nothing to do with that. It's nothing to do with that. All of these people are very, very, very close to the top of the Russian government and of the Russian regime, and but they're making it look like a plain and simple business case, which it's really not. F5 and the police did not immediately respond to requests for comments. Yeah, police did not immediately respond to requests for comment. That's funny. Russian police. Sberbank first deputy chief executive Lev Cassis, who is the chairman of Rambler's board, said he found out about the dispute via media reports and has requested an extraordinary board meeting this month to deal with it. I don't like that this is a criminal trial, Sberbank chairman Erman Gref told Forbes, adding that this is the case for the arbitration court. Well, if this was a plain arbitration court, well, first of all, it's still controlled by the government. You can use different tools to accomplish the same result. The only reason they're using the criminal system is because it scares the bejesus of everyone who is going through that. If really you're fighting against the machine and you're not part of the machine, it's super difficult to do anything, especially in Russia. So despite pledges from President Vladimir Putin to better protect business from inappropriate pressure from law enforcement, it remains a common tool to settle commercial disputes in Russia. And that's the interesting thing about Putin, because what he says is always great, right? Yes, let's help entrepreneurs. Let's build the freest country in the world. Let's make sure that everyone's protected and happy. And on paper, his words are amazing. It's like he's leading the freest nation in the world based on what he says, but that's not really what happens in the country. I wish it did, but unfortunately that's not the case. And that's why so many world leaders are being misled into thinking that he's actually a nice guy, because he can say what you want to hear, right? He's very good at perceiving what people want to hear, and he tells them exactly that, but his actions are, and his cabinet's actions, his regime's actions are the total opposite of the words. All right, a survey by the Kremlin's business ombudsman found 84% of business executives who are subject to criminal investigations end up losing part or all of their business, RBC reported earlier this year. 84% of all investigations lead to the businesses losing half, all or part of their business. That's quite a percentage to you right there. So, you know, going back to the founders, don't be silly. Don't be silly. Leave and restructure the whole thing and see to make sure that the case is heard by a court that's independent and that you can actually secure the assets and make sure that what you guys have built, which is phenomenal, is preserved and not raided by the Russian government. So that's my 2 cents about it. But again, to go back to the initial thought, if you're being reckless and then you're being scammed, who's to blame? Well, if indeed they created the code 16 years ago while being employed for Rambler and they didn't have it in writing in terms of who's going to end up owning that code and what they can do with that code and what they can build around that code, well, that's pretty reckless. And also it's very reckless for the company that they founded to not have caught on to this and ask themselves a question. Well, when we do a due diligence, do we really own the code, the underlying code? Do we really own it? And if yes, how do we prove it? And if not, what can we do to make sure that we own it? They had 16 years to get one piece of paper from Rambler that would say, I hereby confirm that the code of the Nginx server is not written by Sysoev as part of his employment duties for Rambler, and we hereby make no claim to this code. They needed one piece of freaking paper, and they had 16 years to acquire it, to obtain it. They didn't, so now they're paying the price. And that price could be very, very high. So pay attention to ownership, to the trace, to make sure that you actually own what you're building, and make sure you secure your intellectual property. So if you've got a brand and you're not protecting it, you could find yourself the target of somebody else's raid against you. Because when you're not protecting your brand and you become successful, somebody else will protect your brand and stop you from being successful. So that's the lesson. That's the lesson here. If you've got a brand that you want to protect, go to trademarkfactory.com and book your call with us. We'll help you get the process started. It may not protect you from Vladimir Putin, but it will protect you from unscrupulous competitors, from trolls, from those who want to take a free ride on your brand, on your reputation, on your legacy. Do it right now. And if you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe and get notified whenever the next video goes live. And I will see you in the next video.